I promise to marry your brother." The words left Lillian Farnsworth before she could stop them. They hung in the drawing room like a confession spoken in church. Across from her, the Duke of Worthington did not move. Rain struck the tall windows of Rosewood Park in steady silver lines, the storm outside echoing the storm building inside her chest. "I know," the Duke replied quietly. His voice was calm, too calm, as though grief had already burned through him and left only iron behind. Lillian stared at the man standing in her uncle's drawing room. The resemblance struck her like a blow every time she looked at him. The same dark hair, the same strong jaw, the same amber eyes that caught candlelight like molten gold. For a heartbeat it felt as though James Bound had returned from the war exactly as he had promised. But James had laughed when he spoke. This man did not. This man carried silence the way other men carried swords. Gabriel Cavendish stepped forward slowly and placed a small wooden box upon the polished table. "My brother asked that these be returned to you." Lillian's breath caught. The blue ribbon tied around the bundle of letters was unmistakable. Her ribbon? The one she had wrapped around her very first letter to Captain James Cavendish 2 years earlier. A symbol of a promise that had now come back to her in a coffin of silence. Her fingers trembled as she looked up again. "You did not travel from London simply to return letters, Your Grace." For a moment something flickered behind Gabriel's eyes. Regret, or perhaps guilt. "I did not." He paused, and the pause alone told her everything. "I regret to inform you," he said at last, each word heavy with duty, "that Captain James Cavendish fell in battle 3 weeks ago." The world stopped. Not loudly, not violently. It simply ended. Lillian heard the words, but they did not reach her heart. Her mind detached itself from her body as though observing the scene from across the room. A young woman in a pale blue gown, a duke standing before her, a wooden box between them like a grave marker. 3 weeks. James had been dead for 3 weeks, and she had continued writing letters to a man who would never read them, waiting for a promise that had already turned to dust. She forced herself to stand straighter. A lady did not collapse in front of strangers, even dukes. "A letter would have sufficed," she said quietly. Gabriel studied her for a long moment. "You deserved to hear it from someone who understood what my brother intended." Her stomach tightened. "What do you mean?" Instead of answering immediately, Gabriel untied the ribbon around the letters. Then he looked directly at her. "I read them." The room tilted. "You had no right—" "No," he agreed calmly. "I did not." His honesty struck harder than any apology. "I read them anyway." He lifted the letters slightly. "And now I know that my brother intended to marry you." Heat rushed to Lillian's face. Every word she had written, every confession, every fear about her uncle's plans, every desperate plea begging James to return before Lord Reginald forced her into marriage with her cousin Percival. The Duke knew everything. "I also know," Gabriel continued quietly, "that your time is running out." Silence fell again, heavy, oppressive. Lillian lifted her chin despite the trembling inside her. "My uncle is my guardian," she said. "What he decides for my future is not a matter for your concern." Gabriel did not look convinced. "Is it not?" His gaze moved briefly toward the door where voices echoed faintly from the corridor. Lord Reginald and his sharp-tongued sister were never far when matters of inheritance were discussed. "I know what your uncle intends," Gabriel said. "And I know the kind of man Percival Farnsworth is." A chill slid down her spine. Most of society knew. Very few dared speak it aloud. "There is nothing to be done," she said firmly. Gabriel watched her for several seconds. Then he spoke the words that would shatter the quiet world she had tried so desperately to hold together. "There is another way." Her heartbeat stumbled. "What way?" For the first time since entering the room, the Duke looked uncertain. He ran a hand through his dark hair, a gesture so similar to James that her chest tightened painfully. But where James had done it with laughter, Gabriel did it like a man preparing for battle. "I can keep my brother's promise." Lillian frowned slightly. "How?" Gabriel met her eyes. "By marrying you myself." The words struck like thunder. "You cannot be serious." "I am." "We are strangers." "I know enough." His voice was steady. "I know my brother loved you. I know he swore to protect you from the marriage your uncle plans. And I know he is no longer here to keep that promise." A flicker of emotion crossed his face. Someone must. Her knees weakened. Why would a duke involve himself in such a scandal? Gabriel's expression hardened. "Because I read your letters." The rain intensified against the glass. "And because I know exactly what will happen to you if I walk away." Lillian looked down at the ribbon in her hands. James was gone. Her uncle had already begun planning the wedding with Percival. And now standing before her was a man offering salvation. Cold, formal, stripped entirely of romance. "Marriage is not charity," she said quietly. "It is not charity." "Then what is it?" Gabriel held her gaze. "Duty, of course." The word hollowed something inside her chest. "Think carefully, Lady Lillian," he added. "You have until tomorrow morning to give me your answer." "And if I refuse?" His voice lowered. "Then the law of guardianship will prevent me from interfering." The implication hung in the air. Your uncle will win. Gabriel bowed slightly. Then he turned and walked toward the door, leaving her alone with the letters, the ribbon, and the impossible choice between two very different prisons. The Duke of Worthing left Rosewood Park with the rain following him like a silent witness. Inside the carriage, Gabriel Cavendish removed his gloves slowly, staring at the bundle of letters resting beside him on the seat. Lillian Farnsworth's handwriting covered every page, neat, graceful, and filled with a warmth that had never been meant for him. The carriage wheels rolled steadily over the wet road, but Gabriel barely noticed the journey. His thoughts remained in that drawing room, in the way Lillian had stood perfectly still when he delivered the news of his brother's death. Not a tear, not a cry, only dignity. It had unsettled him far more than grief would have. James had always admired strong women. Now Gabriel understood why. He untied the blue ribbon again. The letters slipped into his hands with a softness that felt almost sacred. He had already read them once, too many times, and yet he found himself reading them again. "My dearest James, my uncle insists that I marry Percival before winter. I delay him as best I can, but he grows impatient." Gabriel's jaw tightened. He knew Percival Farnsworth's reputation well enough. A gambler, a drunk, a man who treated servants like furniture and women like prizes won at cards. Another letter. "If you do not return soon, I fear there will be no escape left for me." The words had burned into his memory, because James had promised, and Gabriel had arrived too late to see that promise fulfilled. The carriage slowed as they reached the small inn where he had taken rooms for the night. Harrison, his valet, opened the door. "Your Grace." Gabriel stepped down into the cold evening air. Inside the inn, a fire burned low in the sitting room, casting long shadows across the walls. He poured himself a glass of brandy the moment he entered. The drink burned his throat but did nothing to warm the strange restlessness sitting in his chest. "What have I done?" he muttered quietly. He had offered marriage to a woman who had loved his brother, a woman who would forever see James's ghost every time she looked at his face. Yet the moment he saw her standing there in that pale blue gown, proud, defiant, terrified and yet unbroken, the decision had come without hesitation. James had always followed his heart. Gabriel had always followed duty. But for the first time in years, duty had felt dangerously close to something else. He sat heavily in the chair near the hearth and unfolded the final letter James had written before his death. "Gabriel, if anything happens to me, promise me you'll look after what I've left unfinished." At the time, Gabriel had assumed his brother meant military matters, regimental affairs, loose ends. Now he knew better. James had meant her. Gabriel closed his eyes briefly. "Trust you to leave me the most difficult promise of all." A quiet knock sounded at the door. Harrison stepped in. "Will your Grace be returning to Rosewood Park tomorrow?" Gabriel stared into the fire. "Yes." "Then shall I prepare the carriage early?" "Yes." The valet hesitated before adding carefully, "May I ask if this concerns the young lady mentioned in Captain James's letters?" Gabriel gave a humorless smile. "You may ask." Harrison waited. "And the answer?" Gabriel drained the rest of his brandy. "The answer," he said quietly, "depends entirely on whether Lady Lillian Farnsworth chooses freedom or loyalty to a dead man." Outside, the rain finally stopped, but Gabriel had the uneasy feeling that the true storm had only just begun. The bell of Rosewood Park rang precisely at 9 o'clock. Lillian knew it would. The Duke of Worthing was not a man who arrived late. She stood in the entrance hall with her uncle and aunt watching from the dining room doorway like vultures waiting for a wounded animal to fall. Lord Reginald's voice was sharp with suspicion. Why would a duke return so quickly? Lillian did not answer, because she already knew. The butler opened the door. Gabriel Cavendish stepped inside. He wore a dark coat cut with military precision, rain still glistening faintly on the shoulders. His posture was rigid, composed, every inch the powerful nobleman society feared and obeyed. But when his eyes found Lillian, something shifted in them. Not warmth, not yet, something closer to concern. Lady Lillian, he said with a respectful incline of his head. Her uncle stepped forward immediately. Your Grace, my niece informs me you have made her some sort of proposal. Gabriel's gaze never left Lillian. That is correct. And I would like to know what business a duke could possibly have with a baron's daughter under my guardianship. The room tightened with tension. Gabriel answered calmly, I came to honor my brother's promise. Lord Reginald scoffed. Captain Cavendish is dead. Whatever foolish romantic notions he had are no longer relevant. Lillian felt the words like a blade. Gabriel did not react. Instead, he extended his hand toward her. Slowly, deliberately, an invitation, or perhaps a shield. My offer still stands, he said quietly. For your protection. Her uncle barked a laugh. Protection? My niece is already promised to my son. There is no formal engagement, Gabriel replied. Only an intention. His amber eyes returned to Lillian, and intentions may be refused. The choice now rested entirely with her. Her aunt's whisper cut through the silence. Think carefully, girl. Lillian's heart pounded so loudly she could hear it echo in her ears. Two futures stood before her, one she knew too well. Percival Farnsworth, a marriage built on ownership and fear. The other was equally uncertain. A cold duke who offered duty instead of love. A stranger wearing the face of the man she had once dreamed of marrying. Gabriel's hand remained outstretched, waiting, but he did not move closer. He would not take the decision from her. Lillian drew a breath and stepped forward. I accept. The words echoed through the hall like a pistol shot. Her aunt gasped. Her uncle turned crimson with rage. You foolish girl! Gabriel closed the distance between them before the man could continue. His hand wrapped around hers, firm, steady, unmistakably protective. Then it is settled. His voice had changed. Colder, more dangerous. Lady Lillian Farnsworth will become my wife. Lord Reginald slammed his fist against the table.
This is madness. She belongs to my household.
Gabriel turned slowly, and the temperature in the room seemed to drop. She belongs to herself. The quiet authority in his voice left no room for argument. If you wish to challenge the matter legally, he added smoothly, you may do so before the House of Lords. Lord Reginald paled. Even an ambitious baron knew better than to provoke a duke in public scandal. Gabriel turned back to Lillian. We must leave today. So soon, her aunt snapped. The special license will be arranged in London. His grip on Lillian's hand tightened slightly. Until then, Lady Lillian will remain under my protection. For the first time since James's death had been spoken aloud, Lillian felt something unfamiliar inside her chest. Not grief, not fear, relief. Gabriel released her hand reluctantly. I will return in 2 hours, he said quietly. Bring only what you need. Then he bowed and left the house as abruptly as he had entered. Behind her, Lord Reginald exploded in furious shouting. But Lillian barely heard him, because for the first time in 2 years, she was finally leaving Rosewood Park. And the man offering her freedom wore the same face as the ghost she had loved. The house was in chaos. Servants rushed through the corridors carrying trunks. Lord Reginald shouted orders that no one obeyed. And in her bedroom, Lillian Farnsworth stood perfectly still beside her writing desk. Mary, her maid since childhood, folded dresses into a travel trunk with quick, nervous hands. My lady, London today? Mary asked quietly. Yes. Lillian opened the small drawer of the desk. The bundle of letters rested exactly where she had left them. The blue ribbon looked faded now. Fragile, like a promise that had survived too long. She lifted them slowly. For 2 years, those pages had been her secret world. Every hope, every fear, every whispered confession she had never dared speak aloud. And Gabriel Cavendish had read them. The thought sent a strange heat rising into her cheeks. Will you take them? Mary asked softly. Lillian hesitated. Then she nodded. Yes. The letters disappeared into the trunk beneath a folded shawl. She could not abandon them, even if the man they were written for was gone forever. A violent knock suddenly shook the door. Lillian! Her uncle's voice thundered through the wood. Open this door immediately. Mary stepped back, pale. Lillian closed the trunk calmly before walking to the door. When she opened it, Lord Reginald's face was flushed with fury. You will not leave this house, he said through clenched teeth. I have already arranged your marriage with Percival. I know. You think a duke intends to rescue you like some storybook hero? His laugh was cruel. Men like him do not marry women without fortune. Lillian met his gaze steadily. Then perhaps he's different. Lord Reginald leaned closer. You are being used. The words should have frightened her. Instead, they revealed something unexpected. He was afraid. afraid of losing control. You will regret humiliating this family, he continued. And when that Duke discovers you bring nothing but trouble, you will find these doors closed forever. Lillian lifted her chin. Then they shall remain closed. For the first time in her life, she shut the door in her uncle's face. Her hands trembled slightly afterward. Mary caught her arm. You were magnificent, my lady. I was terrified. But you did it anyway. They shared a brief smile before another sound reached them. Carriage wheels on the gravel drive. Mary hurried to the window. He's returned. Lillian's heartbeat quickened. Too soon. Too real. She straightened her traveling gown and descended the staircase slowly, each step carrying her further away from the life she had known. The front door opened. Gabriel Cavendish stood waiting beside a dark carriage, his tall figure framed by the pale autumn sunlight. For a moment, neither of them spoke. He simply studied her, taking in the small trunk, the determined lift of her chin, the faint tension in her shoulders. Are you ready, Lady Lillian? She glanced once over her shoulder. Rosewood Park stood silent behind her. The gardens where she had waited for James, the windows where she had dreamed of escape. All of it now belonged to the past. Yes, she said softly. Gabriel stepped forward and offered his hand. When her fingers touched his, warmth spread unexpectedly through her palm. Not the bright warmth James had carried. Something steadier, quieter, stronger. He helped her into the carriage, then climbed inside opposite her. Mary followed, settling nervously beside her mistress. As the carriage rolled away, Lillian watched Rosewood Park disappear behind the trees. Gabriel noticed the movement. You may still change your mind, he said quietly. She shook her head. No. Her gaze moved to him. You offered me freedom. For the first time since he had arrived at the estate, Gabriel allowed himself the faintest smile. Then London awaits us. But neither of them noticed the rider who emerged from the distant tree line moments later, a man on a dark horse. Watching the carriage vanish down the road, Percival Farnsworth, and the fury in his eyes promised this story was far from over. The road to London stretched long and gray beneath the autumn sky. Inside the carriage, silence ruled. Lillian sat beside Mary, her hands folded tightly in her lap, while the steady rhythm of the wheels echoed beneath the floorboards. Across from her, Gabriel Cavendish watched the countryside slide past the window. Rosewood Park had vanished hours ago, and yet the weight of that house still lingered in the carriage like a ghost. Mary eventually drifted into sleep, her head resting gently against Lillian's shoulder. Only then did Lillian dare to speak. Your Grace. Gabriel turned his gaze toward her. It was the first time she had addressed him since they left. Yes. Her fingers traced the edge of her glove. May I ask you something? Of course. She hesitated, searching his face. Not the face of James. No, this one carried sharper lines, a harder expression, the quiet discipline of a man who had spent years carrying responsibility. Why are you truly doing this? The question hung between them. Gabriel could have given the easy answer. Duty, honor, his brother's promise. Instead, he answered slowly. Because James believed you were worth protecting. Lillian looked down. That cannot be the only reason. No. His voice lowered. It is not. For a moment he seemed uncertain how much truth to reveal. I read your letters, he continued quietly. And I saw what you were enduring in that house. Her cheeks warmed with embarrassment. You were never meant to see those. No, he agreed. But once I did, I could not pretend ignorance. The carriage rattled over a stone bridge. Gabriel leaned back slightly. My brother intended to save you. And when he died, Lillian said softly, you felt obligated to finish what he began. Yes. His honesty was disarming, but something in his tone suggested there was more. And is that all? His amber eyes held hers. No. Her heartbeat quickened. Then what else? Gabriel hesitated, because the truth was uncomfortable even to himself. While reading those letters, I came to know you. Lillian blinked in surprise. The woman I met through those pages was not weak, he said. She was proud, intelligent, brave enough to speak honestly even when she believed no one would ever hear her. His voice softened slightly. And when I saw you yesterday, standing before me without tears? He paused. You were exactly as I imagined. Color rose in her cheeks. You imagined me? A little. The confession seemed to catch him off guard as well. Lillian turned her gaze toward the window. Fields passed in blurred shades of green and gold. I loved your brother, she said quietly. I know. And I may always care for his memory. I expect you will. There was no jealousy in his voice, only acceptance. The honesty of it startled her. Does that trouble you? She asked. Gabriel studied her carefully. Would it trouble you if I said yes? She hesitated. Yes. Then I will say no. A faint smile touched his mouth. I am not competing with a dead man, Lady Lillian. Something in her chest loosened. The tension that had followed them since Rosewood Park began to ease. Gabriel shifted slightly in his seat. But I must warn you of one thing. And what is that? London society. She sighed quietly. I suspected as much. They will gossip, he said. They will question why a duke suddenly marries a baron's daughter with no fortune. And what shall we tell them? Gabriel considered the question, that my brother introduced us before leaving for war, that we corresponded, and that after his death, his gaze softened slightly. I realized my regard for you had grown too deep to ignore. Lillian stared at him. That sounds almost romantic. It must, he replied calmly. London prefers romance to truth. She laughed softly before she could stop herself. The sound surprised them both, and for the first time since their journey began, the carriage felt a little less like a prison, yet neither of them noticed the rider still following far behind. Percival Farnsworth, patient, waiting, and growing more determined with every mile. They reached London at dusk. The city rose from the horizon like a living creature. Smoke curling from chimneys, carriage wheels rattling over stone, the distant murmur of thousands of lives unfolding at once. Lillian pressed her gloved hand lightly against the carriage window. I have never seen anything so large, she whispered. Gabriel allowed himself a small smile. London has a habit of overwhelming newcomers. The carriage turned into a wide street lined with tall white townhouses. Gas lamps flickered to life along the pavement. Then the horses slowed. Worthing House stood before them, grand, imposing, its tall columns glowing softly in the evening light. The doors opened before the carriage fully stopped. A line of servants appeared instantly. Your Grace has returned. Gabriel stepped down first. Then he turned and offered his hand. Lillian hesitated only briefly before placing her fingers in his. The contact was brief, but steady, not awkward as before. As she stepped onto the stone drive, the house seemed to loom above her like a palace. This will be your home, Gabriel said quietly. Before she could answer, a voice sliced through the moment. How fascinating. Cold, sharp, and unmistakably displeased. Both of them turned. At the top of the marble staircase stood a tall woman in severe black silk. Her silver hair was pinned into an immaculate coil. Her amber eyes, so like Gabriel's, studied Lillian with clinical precision. A bride, the woman continued slowly. And I, it seems, am the last to know. Gabriel's jaw tightened. Aunt Constance. Lillian felt the tension immediately. Lady Constance descended the staircase with slow, deliberate steps. Every servant in the courtyard suddenly became very interested in the ground. And who, the older woman asked coolly, is this young lady who appears at my nephew's door as his future duchess? Lillian felt Gabriel shift slightly beside her, protective. But before he could speak, she stepped forward. Lady Lillian Farnsworth, madam. Lady Constance's gaze sharpened. Farnsworth, Rosewood Park? Yes. A modest barony, if I recall. Lillian inclined her head politely. My father served the crown for 30 years. And how, Lady Constance continued, does a baron's daughter from the countryside persuade a duke to marry her within the span of 2 days? A test, a trap. Gabriel opened his mouth to answer, but Lillian touched his sleeve gently. Let me. She met Lady Constance's gaze without flinching. Through your nephew's brother. A flicker of surprise crossed the woman's face. Captain James Cavendish introduced us several years ago, Lillian continued calmly. We exchanged letters while he served abroad. Lady Constance's eyes narrowed. And after his death? His Grace came personally to inform me. She paused. My uncle intended to force a marriage upon me. The courtyard had grown completely silent. Captain Cavendish had promised to help me escape that fate. Her voice remained steady. When he died, the Duke chose to honor that promise. Lady Constance studied her for a long moment. You are fortunate, she said coolly. To escape one unfortunate marriage only to fall directly into a dukedom. Lillian did not lower her gaze. With respect, madam, I did not come seeking a title. A faint tension passed through Gabriel beside her. I came because your nephew offered me a choice when no one else would. The older woman raised one elegant eyebrow. Your mother, she asked suddenly, was Lady Margaret Thornbury? Lillian blinked in surprise. Yes. Lady Constance considered her carefully. I knew your mother. The coldness in her voice softened slightly. She was a woman of remarkable grace. A long pause followed. Then the older woman nodded once. Well? Her gaze shifted briefly to Gabriel. At least you have not chosen a fool. She turned toward the house. But do inform me when the wedding date is set. After she disappeared inside, the tension broke. Lillian exhaled slowly. Her knees trembled slightly. Gabriel's hand moved instinctively to the small of her back, steadying her. You faced that dragon remarkably well, he said quietly. She looked up at him. I could hardly let your family believe you had chosen poorly. For a moment something changed in Gabriel's expression. Something warmer, something dangerously close to admiration. Lady Lillian, he said softly, you may be far more formidable than London is prepared for. Neither of them noticed the rider who had reached the far end of the street. Percival Farnsworth watched Worthing House from the shadows. And he smiled, because London was a very large city, and accidents happened there every day. The wedding was arranged for 2 weeks later. London society exploded with curiosity. Invitations arrived at Worthing House daily, polite inquiries disguised as congratulations. Why would the odd Duke of Worthing, one of the most powerful men in England, suddenly marry a country baron's daughter? Gabriel ignored them all, but Lillian felt every whisper, every curious glance when she appeared beside him in Hyde Park, every flutter of fans in drawing rooms. That must be the girl who trapped the Duke. Yet Gabriel never once left her side, at dinners, at carriage rides, even during small gatherings at Worthing House where Lady Constance silently observed everything. The city might doubt her, but the Duke never did. Still, one shadow refused to disappear. Percival Farnsworth arrived in London 3 days before the ceremony, and he came with fury. Gabriel learned of his presence the moment the man forced his way into Worthing House one stormy afternoon. The drawing room doors burst open. I demand to see my cousin. Percival stood dripping rain onto the carpet, his eyes wild. You will leave, Gabriel said calmly. The temperature in the room dropped instantly. Percival laughed bitterly. You think a title frightens me? Gabriel stepped forward. His voice lowered. Only a fool fails to fear the consequences of insulting a duke. Percival turned toward Lillian. You belong to our family. I belong to your father's ambitions, she replied quietly. Not to you. You promised. I promised your cousin James. The room froze. And he promised to protect me, she continued. He died before he could keep that promise. Her hand moved slowly toward Gabriel, but his brother did not. Percival's expression twisted with rage. You think this man loves you? Lillian hesitated only a moment. No, she said calmly. But he respects me. Gabriel's eyes flickered toward her. Something unspoken passed between them. Something deeper than either had expected. Percival saw it, and it terrified him, because it meant he had already lost. You'll regret this, he spat. Then he stormed from the house. The scandal he had hoped to cause dissolved before it began. 3 days later, the chapel at Worthing House filled quietly. Only a handful of witnesses stood beneath the stained glass. Lady Constance, Harrison, Mary, and the small circle of servants who had watched the strange romance unfold. Lillian walked down the aisle alone. No father, no family, only the soft rustle of ivory silk. Gabriel waited at the altar, dressed in black, his expression calm, yet when she reached him, his hands closed around hers with unmistakable warmth. The Reverend began the ceremony. The familiar vows echoed softly beneath the chapel ceiling. When it came time to speak, Gabriel did not look away from her. I, Gabriel Cavendish, he said steadily, choose you, Lillian Farnsworth. The word choose made her breath catch. I promise to protect you, to respect you, and to honor you, not only from duty, but because you are worthy of everything I can give. Lillian blinked back sudden tears. I, Lillian Farnsworth, choose you, Gabriel Cavendish. Her voice trembled slightly, because you gave me something no one else ever did. Choice. The emerald ring slid onto her finger. Green, the exact shade of her eyes. You may kiss the bride. Gabriel hesitated for a heartbeat, not from reluctance, but from caution. He would not take what she did not willingly give. Lillian solved the problem. She stepped closer and kissed him first. The chapel fell silent. The kiss deepened slowly, warm, uncertain, but undeniably real. When they finally parted, Gabriel's expression had changed completely. The guarded Duke was gone. Only the man remained. Lady Constance watched from the pew with narrowed eyes. Then very faintly, she smiled. Because what had begun as duty had just become something far more dangerous. Hope,